Maybe we should start a cooking series or maybe eating series. I wonder if people would like to know what we eat.
That's a good question. What do y'all think? Should we show you what we eat? It's pretty boring.
Should we start a new playlist? Should we make more videos?
I think people are probably sick of us in our playlist at this point.
At this point, it's just me and you talking alone in this channel.
I don't know though. There's some pretty loyal comments we get, which is super nice. So it means a lot.
Maybe we'll consider that.
You never know
You just never know with
with
us.
us.
Welcome back to another episode of Relations Today.
Wow,
It's
back
red.
to relations. It's red. Today we're going to be talking about another topic that came to my head as I was thinking about things that happened to me while I was younger, as I'm
Yeah.
trying to, pull those things out of my brain that may still be remnants and causing some trauma here and there. And especially too, I think we've been around a lot of other couples lately
Yes.
because it's Pride Month. So we've tried to go to some Pride events, and we live in a big city, but we don't really go out much here. And so recently we've just been exposed to a lot of other couples and kind of hearing how people date and their journeys throughout dating. And I was thinking a lot about how in, middle school and as you're coming into puberty, you start to see relationships sort of develop in what we used to call puppy love.
It's funny because when you mentioned the term puppy love, I thought we are going to talk about pets.
Yeah, it definitely, when I remember first hearing it as well and being like, puppy love, what is that? But it's meant to be, and of course, everyone's going to have their own sort of idea of what that means for
Right.
them, but it's meant to be a very innocent, sort of naive perspective on love. And usually
Yeah.
it's middle school kids or kids who are just kind of getting into their first boyfriend-girlfriend
Right.
relationships.
The first crush, the first love
Yeah,
that we see in
yeah.
movies, the stereotype.
Exactly, especially like you said, we see in movies. But going through those time periods, even myself, someone who knew I was gay at age 5, I was kind of shuffled into
Yes.
these sort of puppy love straight
Mhm.
relationships
Mhm.
because that was the norm.
Yes.
And granted, there were things I learned there, but I think back on how those moments can be so educational for young kids to learn the dynamic of
Yeah.
what's to be expected as you get older and get into real relationships, which maybe starts in their later teen years or early adulthood. And maybe some of the issues that some of us experience dating as adults, especially when we're just coming into our gayness and our queerness and exploring that with other people, we don't really we didn't really have that educational session as a kid, right? Like an example I think of is when I was in, middle school, I'd always see the kids, holding hands like in between classes. That was like as far as it would go. But sort of just how do you even go to someone and say, "Hey, would you like to hold my hand?" That's takes a lot of confidence, whether you're straight or gay, but all those things they get to kind of troubleshoot as a kid, and we don't really have that opportunity, and so we have to kind of uh, in a way fast forward or try to make up for lost time and learn all these things when we're already starting to think more maturely in relationships, right? That when you're an adult, your mindset when you're dating someone is much different than when you're 10, 12.
Yeah, when you're an adult, you already know what to do. But when you're a kid, everything's new, everything's fresh. You don't know how to approach someone. You don't know how to kiss someone.
Right.
You don't have anyone to talk to, especially being gay too. All those things are even more difficult because we don't actually have crushes on girls.
Right.
We don't have relationship with girls most of the time, so we're
Yeah, lost in translation.
a little more lost in truth. I like that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's interesting is some people have had relationships with the opposite sex that are maybe now gay, and maybe they can attest
Yeah.
to a completely different scenario. But what's interesting about that specific idea is we recently talked to a friend of ours who we were at a table, and I was like, "When did you all know
Yeah.
you were gay?" And the majority of us said younger, but somebody was like, "Oh, I didn't know until I was in my 20s." It's like, "Oh, that's super interesting."
Unusual.
Yeah, in my head, because my
Yeah.
experience is different. And so they're like, "Yeah, I didn't really know till I was 20." So I'm like, "So you mean you dated the opposite sex
Yeah.
and you knew that that was perfectly normal for you? It felt great." They're like, "Oh, no, 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 no. I knew it was wrong." So I'm like, "Well, then you didn't know.
Right.
It wasn't 20s. You knew before that." But everyone has a different idea of when they say in their head or when they like to confirm that, "Oh, this is when I knew." But for me, it was way earlier.
But like you said, there's a lot of us as a kid watching straight couples on TV, on movies, and we think that this is the norm. We think that this is us. But
Yeah.
actually, we learn about ourselves later in life, not until our 20s that we get to explore our sexuality better.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and even those, like you said, the relationships that we see on TV and things like that, they're always typically, a man and a woman or a
Yeah.
boy and a girl. And you can pick up cues and things like that. And certainly that's where I've learned, through media, how relationships are
Yeah.
supposed to sort of exist, even though I didn't necessarily see myself represented there. But yeah, as you become an adult, it's like, okay, I know all of the things that in my head make up a relationship, but because I'm an adult and my hormones are raging, my intentions are often more sexual. So you couple this relationship sexuality together because that's the area and the time you are in your life, and you never get to experience a relationship without that.
Yes.
It's always sex has always got to be,
Yes.
and it's trust. I want sex to be a part of my relationships, but I would have loved to have an experience where I was a teenager or younger, being able to date and not even have that as a thought in my mind.
Just like innocent love, right?
Yeah.
Like the ones that we see movies. Have you seen those movies? First Love in Manhattan or First Love? American
Mm-mm.
movies. I remember watching them as a kid in Brazil. I don't remember those are the real names of the movies, but the movies were about kids. They were probably 12, 13, and they fall in love.
Oh.
Straight couple.
Yeah.
And I remember watching those movies and I would be like, "Ah, I wish I had a girlfriend or a boyfriend or something, or an innocent love, something that is just pure
Yeah.
that I could experience at young age."
Yeah, it's interesting that we have the same idea of what innocent, pure, and these words that I use to describe it as well, because it's definitely society that tells us that once sex gets involved, it's no longer pure, it's no longer
Yeah.
innocent, it's no longer anything. And I don't agree. I think sex is pure in itself. I think sex can be innocent and just all of those same words.
Yeah.
But for me, how I kind of separate it is I just wanted to have that sort of introduction into what it is to be in a relationship where the idea of sex is not a concern, because like you mentioned, as we get older, sometimes when you get into these relationships, maybe you're not quite ready for sex, or maybe you are. There's maybe it just adds a
Yeah.
layer of complexity. And
Hmm.
so to go back to a simple time where
Always impossible.
yeah, no, we can't go back, but if we could, or if I could choose, or if I could go back and say, what is something I think that young gay kids, queer kids should have the ability to interact with each other and experience, would be that. I think it would make a big difference in our confidence, our ability to
Absolutely.
understand how to navigate relationships, and also make us not feel so left out. When I was a kid, that was the reason why I really started to get frustrated with my own sexuality. And I think that's why a couple years later, I was like, I can't do this anymore, is because I would always see these kids passing notes to each other
Yes.
and holding hands and kisses on the cheek and going to movie nights. And I would be there too. I'd be, one of the friends who tag along
Yes.
and just kind of sit there. Certainly I could have probably had a girlfriend
Yeah.
and experienced that, but it just would have not felt the same.
And because we don't have this experience at such young age, when we're 18, 19, 20, we start having gay relationships. So we don't know all the
The
details. We
nuances,
the
right?
nuances of a
Yeah.
relationship. So we kind of are behind in
Hmm.
that perspective
Right.
because we have to make up for the lost time
Right.
all those years.
And then you get into sometimes maybe a relationship.
They're toxic, they're bad
Yeah.
because we're new to that.
Right. Or just like that, you get into a relationship where someone maybe has dated other people before. Maybe they're more advanced than you, and it's your first time dating
Yeah.
someone, and you're like, I want to take it slow. I want to catch up on those puppy
Right.
love years and have that experience, but it's too late.
I want to hold hands, I want to go to the movies, but no.
And you could do all of those things, but at the time in middle school, and when you're coming into understanding what those types of relationships are, going to the movies is a huge step. It's
Oh my
like
God,
something you
yeah.
plan for a week. You pick your
Yeah.
outfit. It's like the climax. Or
Yes.
holding hands is like a big
It
deal.
means serious.
Right. Whereas now, it would be when you're an adult, it doesn't have the same sort of charm or
Oh,
the same sort of flair.
that's just the before sex.
Right. And don't get me wrong. Again, I'm not trying to downplay the importance of sex in a relationship, or as if sex is not, again, a positive. It's just another layer, another complexity that we have to sort of deal with as soon as we're entering relationships a lot of times.
I remember growing up in Brazil, we have a lot of telenovelas.
Yeah.
And obviously, telenovelas, there's a lot of couples, there's a lot of love stories. And every single telenovela has at least 10 straight couples from all ages,
Right.
old, young, kids. There's always the straight couple. There were barely any gay characters. I remember maybe it was like until beginning of 2010s they were starting having gay characters.
Hmm.
But I remember they were supposed to have a gay kiss, but they never had it because it was just too controversial. But I remember wishing that there was a gay character, there was someone to represent me, there was
Hmm.
someone just like me, but not when I was growing up.
Yeah, same here. I think I grew up in those sort of Disney years where I think I had started to get a little too old to watch Hannah Montana, but those type of shows where like it was young kids, the trials and tribulations of growing up, being in high school, middle
Hmm.
school. I remember Degrassi. Have you ever heard of Degrassi?
No.
I think it was a Canadian show, but they had a lot of actually quite complicated scenarios take place
Wow.
between teenage kids about sex, about alcoholism, drug use, a lot of those issues that come to certain kids in
Yeah.
high school. And maybe it's not that way now, but that show's not on anymore. But I remember that being like as close as I got. Maybe there'd be occasional gay character, but they would never have positive relationship with one another. And that actually forced me into liking cartoons more. Even as a
Wow.
more older kid, I would still watch Scooby-Doo, the Flintstones, and granted, there's relationships there, but they're not the highlight of the story. I never saw myself in those preteen shows where the kids were dating
Yeah.
and, oh, this boy doesn't like me or this girl doesn't like me because I was different. I just could not understand that straight dynamic.
That's a great observation. I feel like a lot of queer people, they like cartoons or animations a lot, mostly maybe because there's more representation, or maybe because it's not about a straight couple story,
Hmm.
or it's not about a straight couple plot.
Right.
So I feel like there is this comfort
Hmm.
in animation and cartoons. I too loved cartoons, Disney movies, Pixar growing
Right.
up, because that made me feel safe, that made me feel equal, that made me
Hmm.
feel a person. Because when you're watching those movies and there's an American couple and you feel like, oh, I'm not like them, I wish I was them, I
Right.
wish I like girls, I wish I was kissing them, I wish I like to date them, but we don't.
Yeah, and now it's hard for me to understand and realize how much that impacted me as a kid, but I did try to do some digging in the back of my brain, and this could be all fabricated, but I do remember as a kid, those things were so traumatizing to me in a sense that I couldn't get myself into the plot of a storyline
Yeah.
because I just couldn't see myself or understand why I wasn't being represented, why I couldn't have a relationship like that. And then it goes back into your self-confidence and self-worth and
Yes.
self-esteem, thinking, I'm never going to find love. I'm never going to see myself in this type of environment or this type of situation. I'm going to be alone forever.
Yeah.
Or even worse, I'm going to have to lie to myself throughout my life and be in a relationship with someone that I'm not authentic with.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people choose that route because for them, it could be a much easier path,
Yeah.
especially if you have some sort of sexual or attractive um, ideology, or if you're attracted to the opposite sex, because there is a spectrum of being
Yes.
queer, right? You're not all gay and straight. There's many people who are in between.
So we might
So,
as well stay in a safe way.
right. So if you're in the middle,
Yeah.
you're like, this doesn't bother me too bad.
Yeah.
And then before you know it, 50 years passes
Yeah.
and you've missed, what could
Mm-hmm.
potentially have been more of an authentic version of your life.
Hopefully that's changing a little bit. I hope.
Vote. So yeah, I think it is hopefully just becoming more aware to people out there having these conversations. It's very tricky in a political climate that we're in today to have that
Yeah.
representation not be attacked. It's so funny because a lot of the time people like to say when queer representation is there and available, especially for kids, that you're
Mm-hmm.
grooming kids, right? You're
Yes.
creating a imprint on them that they need to do something. Well, let's just talk about the fact that we have been imprinted into a heteronormative
For thousands of years.
life for thousands of
Yes.
years, and everything we do, there's kids who are 1 years old that wear hats that say future sugar daddy, or
Yes.
the girls can't stop, it's a
Yes.
t-shirt for a 2-year-old boy. Like, what? This is but that's society, right? And do I think there's something innately wrong with that? No, it's a joke, it's silly. But we go back and we look at who is actually being groomed here, what
Yeah.
what is actually happening in the process as we're growing up, who is actually trying to make us be something that we're not. Because when you're queer, you understand deeply that you can't change and you can't change other people.
I remember we saw this statistic not too long ago about how many people identify themselves as gay,
Yeah.
and 1 in 6 identify themselves as queer, which was shocking to me and also made me think how much progress we made so far, because I remember growing up in the 90s, not many people were identifying themselves as queer. So definitely we can talk about progress so far in the last maybe 20 years,
Yeah.
but there's still a lot of room to grow.
Yeah, and I think that younger people being exposed to so many other experiences through social media, which there's plus and minuses
Yeah.
to social media, just creates an idea that there is more out there. There is something else, available for them once they get out of their current situation and environment. But we go back and we focus so much on the phrase that I think our generation experience was, it gets better, it gets
Yes.
better. It should get better now. Like,
Right.
kids are going through traumatic experiences that, yes, in the future it will get better, but those traumas will be with them for their whole lives. And by just leaning on it gets better, we're not allowing ourselves to progress further and ask
Absolutely.
for more and actually demand more. And of
Hmm.
course, in this political environment, it's not a great time to be asking for more. We just want the basics like water, food, shelter, maybe healthcare. But those things should be important to us and should be things that I think the younger generation, even behind us, is going to be more open about, because like you mentioned, those young people, I think it was a study on young people
Yeah.
specifically, 1 in 6 find themselves somewhere along the queer spectrum,
Hmm.
which is incredible, because when I was a kid I would have been like, queer, gay, no, absolutely
Right.
not, get away from me, I'm not even involved in this poll.
I do think internet helps a lot. Look at us on YouTube, teaching everyone, talking to people. But seriously though, we didn't have internet back then, so I feel like social media and internet, Google, all those things, they help our
Yes.
society to be more open to sexuality, just a little bit.
Yeah, and I think when you just take a step back and look at all the progress we've made, when we really look at the fine lines, we've done so much. I mean, look at the fact that we have representation on mainstream television. We have multiple movie shows on
Yeah.
streaming services and cable TV, and there's still work to be done. I think that there's still the dialogue and the conversations that need to be had. People need to see and understand, some issues that maybe my generation, the generations before us, don't see as big deals, because even myself, like, I don't think about this day to day. Like, oh, I
No.
didn't get to hold hands in fourth grade. No,
Right.
that's not a concern, but it
But
did
when
make
you're
an
a
impact.
kid, you're constantly thinking about those things. You're constantly wishing that you could do that. You always
Yes.
watching those movies and you're talking with your friends and they're sharing those experiences about their girlfriends and you're like, ah, I wish I was like that. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like sad to grow up in this environment, but obviously that made us who we are today, the
Hmm.
cliche.
I agree.
But at the same time, I wish I had a crush
Yeah.
in school when I was 14 years old. I wish I could kiss my boyfriend when I was 15. So there are all those things that I wish I could have, but I can do with you now.
Yay. I think the other big part of that too is, of course, experiencing yourself, but the majority of the time spent in these puppy love relationships is actually not even with the person. It's actually the relationships you have with the people around you, right?
All
So
right.
you go to the movies at 13 with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and then you come home and your mom and dad ask, "How was it? How was
Uh,
your first date?" All your friends, "How was your first date?" Your teachers, "Is that your boyfriend? Is that your girlfriend? Tell me about it." And being able to have that dialogue and conversation with other people that support your relationship with
mm-hmm.
someone who isn't going to lead you down a wrong path, right? You're 13 or you're 12 or whatever. And so all those dialogues and that you get to experience with your family, I think also brings you closer to those
Yes.
people. And so when you're gay or queer and you don't get to have that dialogue, it's sort of this brick wall, this layer of, we don't talk about it,
Yes.
and that just continues to grow and magnify. And especially as you become an adult, you most certainly are going to have trouble getting through that barrier, where our straight counterparts, there's never been a barrier. They've talked about their
Oh,
relationships with
yeah.
their family and friends forever.
I forgot how many times I've been asked about relatives of mine if I had a girlfriend
Right.
or if I was not going to bring a girlfriend home or
Right.
where were the girlfriends? Where are the girls? I don't know. I don't know.
and
Where
let's
are the boys?
And let's be honest, the majority of the time, those conversations are not really trying to pry into your life. They're general
No.
topics, right? Like,
Yeah.
how's the weather? How's school? Do you have a boyfriend or girlfriend? They're nice, but
But that's the problem, right? Because they are assuming that I have girlfriends or that I like girls. But that's the norm, right?
right.
That's the normal. That's the stray
Hmm.
world that we live in. You're supposed to have girlfriends. We're supposed to be attracted to girls. That's the whole point.
Right.
Because there's this stigma that you're growing up, you're gonna have a girlfriend, you're gonna go to the movies with them, you're gonna have your first kiss and all those things. But growing up gay, things are a little more complicated. We don't have that. We
Yeah,
fortunately,
it's just not an option.
yeah,
And like you mentioned, it's not in the representation, especially back then in our media. It wasn't a topic that we felt comfortable talking to parents about. But what I do also love is because I do try to follow more queer news and some, social media sort of family blogs because I just am curious, like, how are parents of gay kids
yeah.
interacting with their kids and what do they tell them? And it is reassuring to see there's actually quite large groups online of supportive parents who learn from each other and
Wow.
have these dialogues with their kids, even when their kids aren't gay. They're just approaching their kids in a more gender neutral
Yeah.
sort of way, like, oh, are you dating anyone?
Yeah.
Oh, do you like have a crush? Do you like a boy or a girl?
Mm,
And in creating this idea that maybe it's only 1% of 1% of 1% of families, but that makes a huge
yeah,
impact because that
absolutely.
spreads. And hopefully that's the way and the direction that things continue to go. Hopefully people understand that we're all a little bit different. We
Yeah.
just because things have been done a certain way doesn't mean that that's the way they should be. And maybe there should be more voices, especially queer voices, talking about how parenting should be done and impacting kids everywhere
Well,
of all shapes and
this is a
sizes.
platform, so it's happening a
Hey,
little
it's
bit.
happening. And that's what really led to me wanting to start this. When I was younger, I had no resources. And by no means am I trying to be a role model or have people look up to me or try to follow my footsteps. But maybe there's a kid out there or there's an adult out there who has had similar issues,
Yeah.
had similar experiences. And the comments below mean so much when we hear from people who are,
Sharing
especially,
stories.
yeah, and we hear a lot from all different walks of life, and it's incredible to see too. Sometimes the similarities are a little eerie, right? We have people who maybe 50 years ago were experiencing this, and then people who are today in high school
Yeah.
experiencing the same thing. And I'm like, man, I wish, I hope that these things improve. And then we have other stories where people 50 years ago said my parents were super supportive. And I'm like, 50 years ago?
It's crazy.
And so hearing all of that is just reassuring and helps me to understand that there are different people out there going through different things, and we can maybe learn from each other and how we can better parent our future kids.
Yeah, I love reading about the stories on the comments because a lot of times we think all those issues that we suffer in the past, they don't exist anymore, that we live in a society where everyone accepts sexuality, but that's not the reality. We see a lot of times people are still suffering with the same things that we suffer in the past, the same issues.
Hmm.
They're going through that, but at the same time, some people, they had their parents accepting their sexuality at young age, which is, unique.
Hmm.
And I wish we could have that, but it's good to hear from other people's experiences, people from all over the world, because
Yeah.
we think, oh, only people in America are watching this, but
Right.
no, there's people in Europe, people in Africa, people in Asia. Everyone is watching those
Yeah.
videos and telling us the stories, and it's beautiful to see. Please keep commenting and sharing your stories because we love to hear.
Yeah, they mean the world to us. And ending with that, what are some of the experiences you had when you were a preteen or the first boyfriend or girlfriend that you had? Maybe you tried straight relationships previously. Maybe you knew it wasn't for you. We would love to hear about your experience growing up. And did you experience puppy love? Is it something you felt that you didn't have the opportunity to have, that your other friends got to do and got to experience? We just want to hear from you down below in those comments. So if you haven't yet already, please.
Subscribe, share, like, post, drop a pin.
Yeah, these things all help us reach more people that are just like you, just like us, and maybe some people who aren't, who can learn from us, and maybe we can learn from them too. So we look forward to seeing you at our next episode next week.
And thank you for
Until then,
watching.
yes, thank you for
Bye.
watching. See you next
See you
time.
next time.